There will record. Yeah, so as I was saying, welcome to our February apprenticeship. We've been going strong for several years now. We used to meet in person and now we are online, and that's going super smoothly for us as well. So it's always a great opportunity to see folks in the apprenticeship world and gather together and share some ideas and brainstorm and just kind of see where things are at in this wild and crazy world. And to that point, today we're joined by John Colborn, the Executive Director of Apprenticeships for America. And he and they have been working hard on sort of distilling these new proposed rules from the Department of Labor around apprenticeship. And he has got a lot of information to share with us tonight, and we can feel free to ask him any questions that we may have. But yeah, John, why don't you, or Luther, why don't you kick off introductions?
Sure. Yeah, why don't we just go around, just name a title and organization. I'm Luther Jackson. I'm a workforce consultant. John?
John Colborn, Executive Director, AFA. You'll hear more from me in a second.
Anita?
I'm Anita Gay. I'm with Bayvac Media, an arts nonprofit in San Francisco, and we are an apprenticeship intermediary.
Temple?
No title, just keeping you guys honest.
Excellent.
Appreciate that. Adrian?
Hi, I'm Adrian Summers, Executive Director of Apprenticeship at AACC until Monday, and then I'm actually moving over to the United States Department of Labor in Washington, D.C. in the Office of Apprenticeship.
Great. Rob?
Rob Gamble, California Transit Works.
Carl?
Carl Semino, former training director, now retired. I was the training director for the Pipe Trades Training Center in San Jose, plumber, steam fitters, and HVAC.
Good to see you. Ethne?
Hi, good evening. Ethne Stewart, and I'm a project manager. I work with Calbright College.
Welcome. Nee?
Hi, everyone. Nee Tran, Employment Development Coordinator at Calbright College.
Welcome. Jeff?
Hi, everyone. Jeff Palin, Dean of Workforce Innovation at Mission College.
And Kim?
Good evening. Kim Hudson, Engagement Specialist with Earn and Learn.
Welcome. Claire?
Hi, everyone. I'm Claire Michaels. I'm formerly of Rivet School and SF Made, and currently in job transition, looking for opportunities in career and workforce development.
Great. And Erwin? Erwin, can you hear us?
You're muted.
Okay, we'll
Stepped away, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, if you could put your information in chat, that would be great. Okay, take it away, Anita.
I think it's on to John to take it away and share some of his thoughts with us tonight.
All right, we'll relay it over. Hey, everybody. So great to be with this group. And I have to say, I just want to thank the Bayvac team for inviting me to chat with you all. So let me just let me suggest a little order for my talk, and then you all can tell me if I've got it calibrated right. I thought what I'd do is just give a very high level overview to what exactly are these new rules and what do they mean for apprenticeship in the U.S. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the analysis, concerns, recommendations that Apprenticeships for America has been doing with these rules. And then I want to talk a little bit about what we all collectively as a field can be doing to help shape the rules going forward. Does that sound like am I hitting the highlights? Is there anything missing in there? Okay, good. So let me start with the sort of big picture. So the National Apprenticeship Act, on which all of our work is based, is a really short act. It's about 3 pages long. And so everything that we do, or most everything that we do, is really done under the auspices of regulations that are promulgated by the Department of Labor, and then downstream to, in some places, some of the states, to administer these apprenticeship programs. And So you can imagine, given, how complex we've made apprenticeship in this country, there's a lot in regulation. And it turns out those rules don't change very often. So the last time the rules were sort of opened up for a significant review was 2008. Here we are, 16 years later. Apprenticeship has changed a lot. In those 16 years, it's grown. There's a much higher volume. And there is much more diversity, as this group actually represents, much more diversity in apprenticeship. So I think the conversation or the discourse around apprenticeship has also changed. And so all that suggests to me that it's a good time to be taking up the rules as they relate to apprenticeship. By and large, I want to, there's going to be plenty of opportunities. Apologies, Adrian, beating up on your new employer. There's going to be plenty of opportunities for us to suggest things that the department could have done better or could do differently. But I think the high level that you should hear is that it's important that we do these reviews and refreshes of the regulations. And so we're supportive of this process, and if you've read anything that the department has put out on these rules, there is it seems like almost every other paragraph there's something about we're looking for advice, guidance, and feedback on this particular proposal, and so we're taking the department at its word and are putting forward our ideas around these rules. Let me just give sort of high level sort of what the rules do. There really isn't a single piece of the apprenticeship picture that is not touched by these rules. So everything from how do apprenticeship programs, how are they structured and governed? What's the relationship between the Office of Apprenticeship and the state apprenticeship agencies? How does that all work? That's on the table. The process for determining which occupations are appropriate to registration, changes in that whole process. The process of registering an apprenticeship and working that through, that's on the table. The process of running an apprenticeship and engaging employers and engaging apprentices, engaging related technical instruction, that's on the table. And then finally, you can imagine, we're going to go the whole life cycle. So the evaluation of apprenticeship programs and what that looks like, assessment and the renewal processes for apprenticeship programs, everything is sort of at play. And you may have heard there's this kind of famous number now, 700 pages of regulation. It turns out actually, if you go to the Federal Register, I think it boils down to 189 with their small type. And a good part of the regulation or of those rules is actually descriptive. It's the Department of Labor sort of laying out its case for why it's making those changes. And if you have a couple of hours, it's good reading. It's better written than you would think for a government document, and there's kind of interesting stuff in there. So if you're a real apprenticeship nerd, go for it. The rules themselves comprise maybe about a third of that, maybe a little more than a third of that volume, and so we're going to kind of focus on those rules. And I want to say that the department a little bit set itself up for a sort of an easy critique when it decided that it was going to take what had been sort of guidance and what they call sub-regulatory rules, which is to say not formal rules, but things that the department has promulgated through memos or guidance to SAAs and to apprenticeship programs. It's put that into the rules, and we're actually at Apprenticeships for America, we're actually supportive of that. We think that's a good thing. It really gives greater clarity to what the system looks like, and some level of transparency to the apprenticeship process. So we're actually supportive of that. So a good bit of the rules themselves is really just codifying stuff that we've been doing all along. As we've been going through and doing webinars with practitioners, We put various rules in front of people. We've asked them if this is, a big change from what they've been doing or what they're up to now. And for the in most cases, people will just say, well, that's kind of what we do, not a big change. But there are a few big changes that I want to just draw your attention to. And we kind of group them into sort of 3 areas that map to, our overall concerns or maybe critique of the rules. The first is there's some new stuff, just like brand new innovations, new ideas, new approaches. So I'm going to talk about that for a little bit. There's some new expectations, we might call them burdens, of employer partners and sponsors of apprenticeship that I want to speak to. There's some new guidance or new rules that we think reduce the flexibility of apprenticeship and maybe create some challenges there. And then I'm feeling like I'm missing something. I am missing something, which I'll remember as I go through the discussion. So let me start with the innovations. Really 3 things that are kind of whole cloth new. The first among these is, and by volume, a good percentage of the rules are devoted to this whole new structure, which are called CTE apprenticeships. People familiar with this idea, or yeah, Adrian, yes, of course you would be. It's essentially, think of it as almost a pre-apprenticeship program, although I think the Department of Labor wouldn't like that description, for individuals who are enrolled in secondary or post-secondary education. The outcome is not intended to be a journey person's or journey worker's certificate. It's intended to sort of ramp people up to or explore apprenticeable occupations. And then an outcome from that might in fact be the enrollment into an apprenticeship program. The CTE apprenticeship is rooted heavily in the CTE education world, the world of Perkins and that whole funding area. And it's really intended to represent a collaboration between departments of education and departments of labor at the state level to offer these kinds of apprenticeship or apprenticeship-like experiences to in-school populations. And like an apprenticeship, offers a mix of on-the-job training, learning, and classroom or related instruction learning. And unlike apprenticeships, the weighting is different, so that there's a little bit more in classroom learning and a little bit less on the job learning. But nevertheless, for those of us who believe in work-based learning and earn and learn opportunities, there's something interesting there. The challenge that we see with the CTE apprenticeship is that it's whole cloth new. It's never been done before. It hasn't been evaluated. There's no track record around it. And we have a few questions about whether regulation is the right place to launch something like that, because we know when you're starting something new, things have to change. You're going to learn things. You're going to adjust. You're going to, and regulations, witness, it's been 16 years since we've redone these regulations. Regulations tend to sit and sort of hamstring that kind of innovation and developmental work that we think something like the CTE apprenticeship would need. And what's more, there's lots of other ways that in-school populations are connecting to apprenticeship programs, including directly into apprenticeship programs. And so we think there's just a little bit of opportunity to think about a wider array of alternatives. The second major innovation that's in the rules is the development of sort of occupational standards and apprenticeship standards for particular occupations that would allow for a sort of plug and play approach across particular occupations, and that the Department of Labor would create these sort of packages of guidance for particular occupations, and an apprenticeship program or would-be apprenticeship program can grab those sort of off the shelf, register them quickly, and move on and do apprenticeships. And sort of depending on whether or not it's a national occupational standard, or it's an occupational standard that would be adjusted state by state because there may be licensing or other sort of differences. They're either called standards, occupational standards, or they're called guidelines. But the intent is the same, sort of create off-the-shelf bits of work. And this really builds on work that the Urban Institute and others have been doing to sort of catalog apprenticeship registration information, put it into a place where you can access it, and hopefully streamline the apprenticeship registration process, so we aren't creating one more bespoke occupational apprenticeship in Salesforce administrator, when in fact there's already been 5 of those registered, and let's just be smart about taking advantage of stuff that's already there. We really like the idea of these standards. We think there's opportunities to use that to streamline the process. Unfortunately, the Department of Labor has not actually thought about how that might be used to streamline the process. So we actually call for the Department of Labor to think about how there might be shorter approval periods. There might be reduced regulatory oversight. There might be ways to sort of create better efficiency around these standards. And then the third area is something that internationally has been going on for a while. And again, Apprenticeships for America is generally supportive of this idea, which is the use of something called endpoint assessments. And the idea there is that at the end of an apprenticeship, there would be an assessment of the apprentice that would have them demonstrate that in fact they have the skills and abilities, and that you would be able to use that assessment to sort of award the Journey Worker Certificate, and it would be sort of a common standard for all the apprentices in the apprenticeship program. And if it was under an occupational standard, there would be a common endpoint that could be used nationally for this work. We actually like this. Our only concern is instituting this through regulation and going from sort of 0 programs having endpoint assessments to suddenly mandating that everybody should have assessments is a little bit concerning to us. We're just not sure the field is ready to be able to take on an endpoint assessment regulation like this. And so we actually call for a sort of more careful rollout, and start within a couple of places where you might use an endpoint assessment and sort of use that experience to inform what might be a regulatory framework from there. We also think this is a place where the Department of Labor kind of missed an opportunity, because if you have endpoint assessments, maybe you don't need all that process regulation. If you actually have a way to measure outcomes, maybe you can actually reduce some of the process overhead that's part of the regulatory regime around apprenticeship. And unfortunately, the Department of Labor has gone the other direction. Not only is it added a mandatory endpoint assessment, but it's added sort of process regulation on top. And that just, to us, feels like overkill at best, and at worst, just creates a regulatory regime that's going to be disincenting the establishment of apprenticeships, which actually brings us to our second sort of area, which is the burdens or the regulations as they relate to employers. And here there are a number of issues that we sort of take on in this space. First among these is we have some concerns about the sort of paperwork, record keeping burdens that are being imposed on sponsors and then downstreamed to employers in the regulations. And we think that there needs to be some more careful calibration of some of those paperwork requirements. As we've said, as many have said, apprenticeship is a voluntary act. The creation, the sponsorship of apprenticeship is a voluntary act. We do not have buckets, boatloads of money that we're giving to employers to do apprenticeship, and most are doing it without any public subsidy. And so every time you add to the cost of an apprenticeship, you're likely disincenting at least one and probably many more employers from pursuing at least registered apprenticeship. And so we think the department should recalibrate some of these expectations. There's a couple of things we think we would sort of put into that package. For example, There is language in the rules that suggests the Department of Labor could sort of work around a sponsor and directly make records requests to an employer. We just think that that doesn't make sense. The relationship between the Department of Labor is with the relationship the Department of Labor is with the sponsor. We think the sponsor should sort of be responsible for that. There are additional burdens, requirements that are put on employers that we think just should be at worst rolled back to expectations that are currently in law or currently in regulation. And at best, maybe there are ways to even lighten that load a little bit. There are a couple of other kind of zingers in the regulatory proposal that we would push back pretty hard on. One is there's a very, very broad sort of legal disclosure that's required, not just of sponsors, employer sponsors, but of any employer participating in a group sponsored registration, essentially requiring that employer to disclose every single legal infraction they've ever had, and then what the resolution of that legal infraction was. We think that's very, very broad. As I joke, if you were trying to do an apprenticeship with General Electric, you'd be going back 150 years for a global organization to be able. It would be a book. You could write a book on every legal infraction General Electric has ever been involved in, and that just seems like a wild overreach and highly disincenting. For those of us who've actually tried to sell apprenticeships, I mean, you've sold HR, you've sold the operations manager, and then now it's like, oh, just one thing, I need to talk to your general counsel, right? This is not the way to bring employers on board in apprenticeship. We're also concerned with some of the provisions that are now being asked of employers in apprentice agreements. The apprentice agreement itself has some new rules. Two of them speak to non-disclosure, prohibitions on non-disclosure provisions, and a prohibition on non-compete provisions. You all probably know the Department of Labor has been pursuing sort of non-compete regulatory guidance for a while. I think they saw an opportunity to sort of slip that into apprenticeship, and we think there are some issues with that, just how that will play out. There's relatively simple fixes, we think, on the non-compete, but on the non-disclosure, but on the non-compete, we see significant issues for employers, and we've been hearing that loud and clear. And then the last thing I'll just say is there are maybe I'll just leave it there on employers. And then, there is one other, and this is for sponsors, but also employers, which is a requirement that any registered apprenticeship program should show that it has the financial viability to be able to operate. We have no idea what that would look like. What does financial viability mean? And number two, again, now imagine, in addition to talking to your counsel, can I talk to your CFO? Because I need to go through this financial viability process with you. It's just not going to happen. And so we are strongly opposed to that. We've pretty much gotten by for, almost 100 years in apprenticeship without having a financial viability rule. And it's a little hard for us to see, what problem it is we're trying to solve here. So let me just take a couple of other examples of what's going on in the rules, and then I want to talk about the comments process. But before I do that, can I just stop for a second and just do a calibration? Am I on target? Is this helpful? Any feedback? Thumbs up from Rob, thumbs up from Adrian. Okay. All right. Adrian, hopefully I'm not beating up your bosses or your new bosses too much in this. We have a broad sort of objective in our comments on these rules around the issue of flexibility, because we think apprenticeship grows when it's flexible. Labor markets change all the time. Occupational skill needs change all the time. We need to make sure we have an apprenticeship system that can sort of shift with those changes. And there's a couple of provisions in the rules that really, to our mind, work against this idea of flexibility. Perhaps the biggest example of that is in what's called the suitability. It used to be called the apprenticability process. This is the process by which the department determines that an occupation is suitable for apprenticeship. And that process has gotten much more burdensome in this new set of rules. And essentially, even now, it's pretty burdensome. So right now, you basically have to create your apprenticeship program if you're working in an occupation that is not currently deemed apprenticeable. You have to basically go through the work of creating an apprenticeship program, then hope that the Department of Labor will take all that information and declare it apprenticeable, and then actually submit your apprenticeship registration. And we just think there's a better way to do that, that there should be better staging of these processes so that you're not upfronting a whole bunch of work speculatively, not knowing whether or not the occupation will even be allowed. So we think there's some opportunities there. But there's another provision that's been introduced into the suitability determination process, or two other provisions that we have problems with. The first is something is addressing an issue which the Department of Labor calls splintering. And that's the notion that there should not be an occupation declared suitable that already has been, that components of it have already been declared suitable in another occupational area. And the sort of classic example of this that's sort of ripped from the regulatory headlines in apprenticeship is the notion of solar installers. So solar installation was proposed as an occupational area for apprenticeship, and it was determined to overlap with electricians, and so it was declared not suitable as an apprenticeship area. Now, surely in the installation of, so I've done 2 solar installs on my homes, and so surely there is an electrician that's involved, but there's a lot of work that is not sort of electrician work in solar installation, and we think this concern about splintering, while there's real concern about a race to the bottom or undermining particular occupations. That there are other ways to deal with that without wholesale cutting off any occupation that happens to share certain characteristics or skills with occupations that are currently apprenticeable. And so we push back pretty hard on that. The second thing in the suitability area that we think also runs against flexibility is that the Department of Labor is pulling back the decision-making around the suitability determination to the federal national level, and not allowing states to undertake suitability analysis on their own. And we think this sort of runs against an opportunity to make experiment with new occupations and to sort of try new things. It's one of the hallmarks of our federal process that we should allow for a certain level of experimentation at the state level and use that to learn and inform national level work. So we have a counter proposal for the department that will continue to allow states to provide, to undertake those sort of suitability determinations. I'm trying to think what else around. So there are a few other things around flexibility that we think it just would be helpful for the rules. So if you read under related technical instruction right now, it's very weighted towards the idea of sort of in-person or sort of traditional instructional methods. There's no envisioning of online or other kinds of instructional methods. So we just think you should broaden the language so that we're making sure that everything is sort of on the table. And similarly, the wage progression, we actually think some of the ideas that the department is pursuing around a structured wage progression rule makes sense, but it doesn't envision every sort of circumstance that might be out there. And there could be circumstances where you want to allow for a little flexibility around your wage progression. So we have some proposed wording on that. There's one last thing on sort of flexibility that I want to speak to, and many people have raised this, which is the question of hybrid or competency-based apprenticeship. Many apprenticeships that are being registered today are using some version of competency-based, not hours-based apprenticeship design. In the current rules, there's a little bit of ambiguity about exactly whether or not competency-based apprenticeships survive under these rules. There's certainly one read that says that it could, or there are ways to do it, and there's other reads that suggest no, it must be strictly hours-based. And so we actually think that we should just have clarity that, in fact, a competency-based or at least a hybrid-based approach to instruction and skill acquisition for apprenticeships makes sense. That's the kind of flexibility we like to see in apprenticeship. And we should make sure that the wording in the rules is clear, that that is permitted and under these new rules. I feel like I could go on for a while longer, but let me stop there. Those are sort of highlights that we have. I'm gonna post in the chat. We have a whole bunch of resources that we put together, a summary of the rules, a summary of some of our recommendations on the rules, sort of deep dive analysis into sort of burdens around sponsors and employers, as well as deep dives into the CTE apprenticeship, the issues as they relate to sponsors, how assessment is being treated in the apprenticeship rules, and so on. So let me turn to the comment period and our opportunities to comment there. On the 18th of March, our formal capacity to be able to submit comments ends. So the good news is we have about 3 weeks to sort of get our thinking to the department. In fact, getting stuff into the comment process is really, really easy. And so we tried to make it a little bit easier at Apprenticeships for America. So I'm going to share a couple of tools with you on that. But essentially, if you go to the Federal Register where these rules have been published, there is you click a button, you can make a comment. You don't even have to upload a document if you don't want to. There's a text box, you can just type it in. You can be very specific in your comment. You can be very general in your comment. And you can do it very, very quickly. You don't need a lawyer. You don't even need to find that squiggly, section symbol. You can just type in plain English what your concerns are and what your suggestion is to the department in terms of its consideration in these rules. We actually have provided a sample template that you can use. Any comment is better than no comment. So let me just say, if you just want to cut and paste our template in and just submit that, that's fine. But if you modify it, it'll have a little more impact. And we kind of threw the kitchen sink into our template, so you could just delete everything except the issue you care about and just submit that. Or you can tell a little story about how a particular issue is going to impact some of the work you're up to. At Apprenticeships for America on our website, we have a way you can do comments through our website, or you can do comments directly with the Federal Register. We're really trying to press on getting as many comments to the department as possible. As I say, we take them at their word that they're really looking for feedback and guidance and advice on these rules before they become final. Oh, and let me say one last thing just on the prospects for the rules. So there are a couple of possibilities. If you just look at what's happened with other kinds of regulatory proposals like this one, sometimes they just get adopted in total, right? So nice that you all made comments, but we're just going right ahead with these rules. We think that's a very unlikely outcome for these rules because they're so expansive and because there was such call for feedback in the published notice. We think that there's likely to be significant changes, but they can just decide to ignore it all. The other thing that can happen is that there can be such feedback that the rules are actually pulled, and the department will we'll come back and give it another try at another time. We think that's a little bit unlikely because the possible changeover in administrations has the department very focused on a timeline that tries to get these rules done by the end of this year. So that could be a little bit aggressive, but that's what they're pushing towards. And we know, for example, proposals to extend the comment period are not getting a lot of traction with the department. So our sense is they're very focused on a timeline that gets this done during the current administration and doesn't have the rules skip over into the next administration. There is the possibility, however, that they just missed the deadline, right? And if we have a different president in the next term, then all rules are off because we would expect the rules to be pulled and the new set of rules to be developed if then, because we know that the Republicans have a very different view of what apprenticeship rules should look like. And I'll just say one last thing on the rules that even if they're adopted, we see some potential barriers to implementation, particularly from state apprenticeship agencies and states that may want to push back on these rules through lawsuits or what have you. There's one other wrinkle that's out there, which is there is a push, particularly in the Senate, to do a new National Apprenticeship Act, and that could then supersede a lot of the rulemaking that's here. Now, what the prospects of that act would be in this Congress and this environment, it seems unlikely that we would actually see full-blown legislation passed before the end of the year, but we know that there are moves in the Senate right now to start moving forward with hearings on the National Apprenticeship Act. So let me stop there. I'm going to now put a bunch of stuff in the chat, some links and resources, encourage you to look at that, and let's have a conversation.
Thank you, John. That's a great overview. Any initial questions?
Who was involved in the creation of these? Did they have some kind of committee that was involved? I don't know, like labor contractors. Is there that kind of involvement?
So there is actually a formal advisory committee to the Department of Labor, and many of these, and again, I want to give credit to the Department of Labor. Many of these rules come from advice that was given to them from this committee. Now I will argue that committee is a little bit over-representative of sort of traditional apprenticeship and particularly labor-aligned apprenticeship. And so I think there was sort of one perspective in some of those, some of that feedback. But I will say the department listened widely to the field. Many of the ideas that are represented are ideas that advocates and researchers have had for a while. So I actually give the department some credit for being open to a lot of ideas. Maybe open to too many ideas might be a criticism, and not having sort of prioritized or sort of figured out exactly which ideas we're going to sort of they were going to go with. But is that responsive to your question, Carl? Yeah. Okay.
Others? I have a question, John. What other groups are kind of undertaking the same detailed process that AFA has as far as the rules are concerned?
So it kind of breaks down into somewhat the usual suspects. Certainly we are hearing employer associations take this on. And we are actually working with a wide array of employer associations to help inform some of their thinking. So that's certainly appropriate. I will also say that some of our friends in the House of Labor have also been taking on a certain level of analysis. Now, these rules reflect a lot of ideas and thoughts from the House of Labor. So I think there's been less sort of pushback on the rules from labor-oriented folks. And then I'll also say that a couple of the think tanks in Washington are also doing, their own analyses. So Urban and others have been taking this on.
I think AIR is doing it also, American Institute of Research. I think I've seen something from them.
That's excellent. Thanks, Adrian. I need to look for that. Thanks.
Is there any sort of effort on Apprenticeships for America to sort of, what's the term, like gather signatures or gather together comments on your own behalf and present those to the Department of Labor? I know you're encouraging us to go individually to make comments, but
yeah. So we are we actually, if you I just put in the chat a link to what we call our Action Center, this is a place that we're really trying to get people to put in their comments. That we are stipulating. I mean, we're trying not to say we're speaking for anyone, because everyone has their own view. I mean, I think the work that we're doing is informed by conversations with literally hundreds of apprenticeship advocates, practitioners, researchers. But I don't think we're trying to say we're speaking for them. Our sense is, let's just get a lot of people with comments in. We try to provide a framework for giving a comment, but we also understand people are going to come with their own concerns and issues, and that's fine too. Other thoughts or reactions? What's on your mind? I mean, what are those for those of you who are,
I have a reaction. And I work mostly in public sector apprenticeships, where budgets and history are all in the public domain. It's not a big issue. But I've also been in a position where I've tried to promote apprenticeship in the private sector. And I've got to think those two things in there about disclosing your books and disclosing your legal, it's just over. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's really good reasons for both those things, but the number of new apprenticeships will just, outside of the public sector, because for us, it's public record, so it's not a big whoop. But I just think in the private sector, that's the end of it.
Yeah, we don't disagree. And I find it hard to believe those provisions are going to survive the comment period. Look, you could endlessly speculate on sort of where did these ideas come from, and we actually do know. Actually, in California, I think there was a apprenticeship intermediary effort that kind of went bust, right? And there was actually a little scandal about it. Blah blah blah. I think that actually informed some of the thinking around some of this stuff. But I find it hard to believe these are going to survive the comments process. I don't know. I know the Hill is that various, and not just Republican and Democrat Senate and House offices have this in their sights, that these issues are untenable.
And the other one that's interesting is I can't remember the term they use, the end-based assessment.
Endpoint.
And then not being supportive of competency-based apprentice. It seems like they're working in opposition to one another.
I've heard that a couple of times. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, that would be my view.
Because isn't a competency-based kind of an end? Aren't those sort of similar? Okay, just checking.
Yeah. No, I exactly. You sort of shake your head like, but I will also just say, and that's kind of a dynamic in these rules, is there's clearly many voices, many hands have been part of putting together these rules. And I think, if I have a knock on the department, there was no sort of single person in charge who said at the end, okay, this is in, this is out. It just feels like everything was in. I talked to actually another federal agency that was talking to the authors of the rules, and she said she'd never seen so many rules authors on a call. It just like boggled her mind. She just like, how is it that this many people were involved in this rule?
Thank you, Carl.
Yeah, that's the competency-based, this endpoint assessment thing has been an issue because if you use it, once that gets in there, then someone can say, well, you know, I haven't spent a minute in that apprenticeship, but I want to go ahead and take the endpoint exam. And if they pass it, then they get an apprenticeship certificate. And I don't think that that's the best way to go about it. And I've had personal experiences where I worked on a military base, and so the inspectors are the military, and so they got some lieutenant, they gave him a plumbing code book, and he memorized it, chapter and verse, but he didn't know anything about what any of it meant. And he could pass a test on it. He'd do really well passing the test on it, but he didn't know squat about plumbing.
Yeah.
That's the danger of just saying, oh, if you have an assessment, then it's okay.
So I'll just say that in other countries that have used assessments, there is a whole assessment regime. So it's not just, you know, to a test, that there's, you know, applied work that you have to be able to demonstrate, you know, and that reflect the on the job competencies that have been developed. And I think one of our, on the one hand, we really like that the Department of Labor did not sort of start stipulating that they were going to have to approve every endpoint assessment test or what have you. But we also sort of wonder whether the field is ready to be able to design these kinds of endpoint assessments, just whole cloth, at scale, all within 2 years. And it just felt to us like there needed to be a slower and more careful rollout of the endpoint assessment. So what we are what we're advocating is that they are voluntary, that in exchange for doing it, there should be regulatory relief. So you should be able to get perhaps be able to apply, be able to register an apprenticeship with, you know, less oversight of the related technical instruction, for example. And that for the national occupational standards, where building the endpoint assessment would be part of designing the occupational assessment, you would require them. So in other words, you would sort of seed the field with well-designed, well-developed endpoint assessments in a handful of places, encourage others to sort of experiment and test out the idea, and you could sort of build it out from there. That's sort of our thinking on it.
Other questions? We have a few minutes left. Adrian.
I know most of you are from California, but if you want to peruse Maryland K through 12, there's a program called Blueprint. And Blueprint is focusing on CTE, which includes apprenticeship. It's very, very ambitious. In full disclosure, I have a daughter who is a high school CTE teacher. So we have had many conversations about apprenticeship, and it's just a very ambitious program that may not be set up for success at this point in time, but it's interesting reading because of that CTE connection. And I can see a lot of parallels, I believe, in this rules for the apprenticeship.
Where can we find?
I'll just say, on my board is a senator, a state senator from Maryland. So I get a lot of ideas from Maryland.
Yes.
And
yes.
there's, I think this is a little bit the disappointment of the CTE apprenticeship proposal, which is just that there's a lot of really great stuff happening, and to sort of decide in regulation that we're going to sort of embrace one idea feels like we're kind of missing an opportunity to sort of look widely at a whole range of innovation that's out there.
Right. And Maryland has Maryland has a very robust youth apprenticeship program that feeds into registered apprenticeship. So it's already existed in one aspect, but there are things, especially in a K through 12 program, they're not thinking about is transportation. And how are you going to get the students who don't drive to the employer, and how do you work around the schedule? So it's things like that you really need to have
Central.
the mindset, right?
Yeah.
Of
Yeah.
how are we going to address all these problems?
Yep.
And I think, Anita, you started to say, where can you find it?
I think, and then I found it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you should be able to Google it. It's Maryland Blueprint, and I'm sure it's a very large document, so.
Thanks, Adrian. Carl.
Yeah, when I see all these changes, and there's a lot of push to create new apprenticeships, and I think that's all really fine and good, but my biggest concern is somebody that's went through an apprenticeship 40 years ago, was apprenticeship director for 20 years. It's about, for me, it's about this kind of the sanctity of apprenticeship, all of a sudden we've become this really cool thing that everybody's very, very interested in, and they want to make it happen. And then all of a sudden, a lot of people's, governments, agencies decided, well, we're going to make these ambitious goals. And sometimes when you do that, the goals, they make everybody kind of bastardize the whole system that they were trying to emulate that was very successful. And that's scary for me. What I see a lot of is people moving the apprenticeship thing more towards school and further away from the job site. In the organization that I was a part of, an apprentice went to school for 1,000 hours over a 5-year,
Right.
and they had 9,000 hours of on-the-job training. The goal is to get this person not to just learn the stuff in a classroom. The goal is to help them learn what they're doing on the job site by giving them classroom support. But the big reason why the apprenticeships are successful is because they already, by the time they get to the end of it, they know what that job site, what that workplace is like. And so then they don't change their mind. Somebody goes through college, and many people that go through college, they master or they go for a certain occupation, whatever, and then it's like a cliche that somebody doesn't work in the area that they went to school for. That's because they never experienced the place they were thinking they were going to work, and they didn't understand what it's going to be like. And apprenticeship doesn't have that issue if it's done the right way.
Done right. Yeah. Yep.
I shouldn't say this, but apprenticeship isn't just school, it's apprenticeship. And
Starts with the job. It starts with the job. The school is in service to that occupational, but yeah, I agree. Well, listen, I just want to say thank you so much for being an engaging group. If you've got any questions, I'm just going to put in the chat my contact information. If you want to follow up on anything, just let me know. Happy to chat about this. As you can see, I nerd out on it, so I love talking to other nerds who are into regulation and talking back to regulation as much as I do. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, John. I'm also going to note in the chat here, if you all haven't already signed up for our emails for ApprenticeSIP, or if you know somebody that would like to receive emails, you can fill out that form, and also you can suggest topics for us to have in future sessions, since we're trying to hold these monthly. And our next session will be the last Wednesday of March, which is the 27th. We're still working on finalizing the topic for that session, so stay tuned. You can also join our meetup group, which I'll put in the chat as well. But yeah, thank you again, John. Luther, do you have any points to make?
Claire.
This is
Great.
fabulous. Thank you so much, John. Thanks, everyone. I knew this would work out well. This is wonderful.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Luther. Take care.